So my name's Alexander Culley, and I'm performing two roles actually at the moment. So I've been secretary of Southampton branch since August last year, albeit on an interim basis. And I've recently, within the last week or so, also been volunteered for the role of Hampshire County Organiser. So that encompasses Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
So there's these big sort of devolution proposals coming in for Hampshire County Council. What would Reform UK like to see done differently? Because obviously there is, on Reform UK's perspective, quite a lot of opposition to the plans.
Yeah, so I think our main issue with it, when we studied the proposals, and of course there are two things going on at the same time, and I think it's important to be clear about that. So the consultation that we responded to was in relation to the mayoral devolution plans, and I think the biggest concern from it was actually in relation to the data and the workings which were being used to underpin the assumptions in the consultation. We felt that there wasn't a lot there to go on. So there was a lot of statements that this is going to deliver savings for the area, it's going to deliver increased efficiency, things like that, but there's not really a lot of evidence to support that, not in our view. So we had to look at what was happening in other areas. So say Manchester, London, not a great example for comparison, because the legal mechanics are slightly different. But we did look at Manchester and a couple of other areas as well to try and work out what had happened there. And I think there's some things we try to be balanced. We didn't just want to go in, have a rant, and just say, right, this is all terrible, because we're not wedded necessarily to the current setup, but we just want to understand what it's going to mean for our local identity, because Hampshire's a huge area with a lot of variety, a lot of differences between the areas, and of course the Isle of Wight too. They've got their own distinct identity. What it's going to mean in terms of additional costs for the taxpayer. So there's going to be a cost associated with this new structure, and that would also go on to council tax bills as a precept, what they call a precept, which is effectively an additional line item, additional charge. So what would that look like, and how much could residents expect their bills to increase, if at all? And then also the mechanics of how the actual governance of it is going to work, right? Because the mayor's going to come in, and then they're going to have these sort of supporting advisors, some of which are not going to act in a voting capacity, is our understanding. So they're going to advise maybe as experts in particular areas of policy, maybe transport, housing, that type of thing. And then there's going to be the representatives from the four, we believe to be four kind of administrative areas. So broadly speaking, corresponding now to Southampton, Portsmouth, Isle of Wight and Hampshire County Council. But of course, that's also going to change with local government reorg. So, and that, again, that interlink is not completely clear yet. So that was really our concern. We believe that, maybe it's being driven through from central government, but that the real implications for our area have not really been completely explained or thought through.
So is there opposition inherently to devolution, or is it just the specifics that you're sort of questioning? Not
inherently, because of course, being who we are, we're a reforming party. We believe that there's something clearly wrong with the current system, from national government to local government. But we don't always believe that change for change's sake is necessarily going to deliver a better result. And clearly, the current structure isn't working up to a point, because Hampshire County Council, Eastleigh Borough Council, Southampton City Council, as examples, are heavily indebted. And in the latter case, there was a peer review governance report which was commissioned by the Local Government Association earlier this year, that actually got published earlier this year, which was quite critical of the governance and the workings of Southampton City Council. So clearly there are issues to be addressed. However, it's how you go about doing that. And is going to be putting a mayor there, is it really a somebody that central government sees as going to be their agent on the ground, rather than somebody who's really going to work for the local people, or is it going to be something which is, hang on a sec, let me just switch this off. So I get so I've got other business things going on here. Is this going to be in the interests of the people, or is it going to be in the interest of central government? Because effectively they want to go between the local setup and the national. To a certain point, it makes sense, right, that you have that kind of setup, but equally, what we don't want to have is top-down administration in the guise of devolution.
Is there also sort of concern, I suppose, in terms of how a potential mayor might interact with the existing bodies of, Southampton City Council and the County Council, etc.?
100%, because if you can imagine, so say this mayor gets elected and they're from party X, and Southampton City Council or whatever succeeds that is dominated by party Y, and then their representative gets put in the advisory board, which effectively is what they're going to what they're going to be working with. You could see a situation where there's going to be roadblocks. You can see that there's going to be tension. And I actually reviewed quite a lot of the political journals. So we looked at some of the academic papers and some of those studies which had looked at how mayoral setups have worked in other parts of the country, so like Northumberland and places like that, Yorkshire. And they actually interviewed some of the mayors that had worked in those structures. And the mayors actually said that their role, when they ended up taking it on, actually was quite different to what they thought it was going to be, because there's obviously this whole big political campaign to get them elected. But then once they were elected, a lot of it's about horse trading. And one of the commonly cited frustrations was that, their ability to work with quite partisan local authorities, that, they might have this idea, which is, right, let's integrate transport in some way. Let's do something to increase the efficiency between area A and area B. But then on political grounds, that ended up getting frustrated. So, that is a valid concern, I think, because yes, things are not completely joined up at the moment, but what we don't want is an additional bottleneck, and because of party political manoeuvring, less gets done because one of the constituent authorities is opposed to the mayor who's in charge, and therefore then seeks to frustrate some of the initiatives that they might want to take.
So how would Reform UK sort of strengthen the authorities that exist in Southampton without obviously causing any kind of tensions that you're saying this proposal would sort of ignite? So
it's a good question, and quite rightly, as we start to develop in our profile, we are going to get more scrutiny in terms of what we're actually going to do. So what we are going to do in the coming months is we're going to develop a sort of like a policy platform which is locally driven, and we are going to make it evidence-based and peer-reviewed. So we're going to look at, for example, what Southampton City Council, if you're to take that as an example, what has it done well? What has it not done so well? Look at the relevant local government association reports and other and similar bodies to that, and then try and identify the things that work, the things that don't, and then try to create a cohesive program which draws upon those things. I think at the moment, I think it would be too simplistic just to say, right, we're just going to go and cut this, or we're just going to add that, because, and I think this is the danger of local government, it's actually a lot more complex than I think most people realise, because, for example, you need to be able to be clear that what you're doing, you can actually do in accordance with national legislation. So I wrote an article to the Daily Echo quite recently about, for example, the potential to use artificial intelligence. So that's definitely one area that we think we could use to increase local government efficiency. Is it a panacea? No, it isn't. Does it have some risks attached to it? Yes, it does. So, but is there an opportunity, and can we hold back the tide? No, we can't. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to say, okay, in that particular example, we read a report that was published by Southampton City Council, and they said, it was very brief, it was their IT strategy document or something, and it said, we're looking to implement AI, taking a cautious approach with an end result by 2030. That's a kind of end destination. That's far too slow. You know, businesses now are rapidly changing as it is, and you know, the taxpayers on the ground, they want to see results. So what we want to do is look at how we could use a tool like that, but within what national legislation allows us to do, to try and realise additional efficiencies within the existing structure, but then look for opportunities, say, in the new structure to, because it's coming, nothing's going to stop that, right? We can't, our preference would be to have a referendum or something as to whether this is what the people actually want, but it's coming anyway. They've made that very clear. So we're going to have to work within that structure. So then, you know, the mayor ideally would take some of the points which have been working well and have that ability to coordinate that strategically across Hampshire in the different areas. So that's kind of, you know, what our ideas are. So we've built a table of where all the national legislation restricts a local authority from doing something. So if you take like the Care Act and things around that, and how you can't reduce social care provision. So we have to work within that. So we might have the ability to maybe change a provider or exercise more scrutiny of a provider, but you can't cut the provision under current legislation. And we're not saying that we want to, but I think that is where we're trying to be realistic and show that we're credible. It's not just about shouting about something. It's got to be something we can actually deliver. Otherwise, we're just going to let people down. If
there is a mayoral election, it would be for May 2026. Is there sort of any specific manifesto pledges that Reform are sort of going to include?
Well, so we're working on that. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. So obviously, what is the mayor going to be responsible for? That's the starting point. So they're going to be responsible for housing, the social care delivery, I think, or that's going to come under the remit. There's going to be some adult and employment skills type things, and transport and the environment. So we're going to create a manifesto which is speaking to each of those areas. And really our remit, as we see it, is to realise efficiency. So you may have heard or read in the press about the DOGE project, the Department of Government Efficiency. Really, for us, it's about looking at where there's an overlap in services, where there's services could be more efficiently delivered because, you know, maybe there's a better way of doing it that hasn't been thought of yet. That's what's going to inform our program. We don't have the specific sort of, if you like, the bullet points which I can give you, which says, right, we would do X, Y, and Z yet, because that's still being discussed locally. But what I can reassure you is that we're going to have things like policy forums locally, and we're going to bring people together from across Hampshire who are in, you know, our membership, who are looking to perform certain roles and have certain degrees of expertise, and we're going to leverage that to create this policy framework. And once that's been done, we would be happy to come back and speak to you about it, talk to you, show you what it is, walk you through the different elements, and you can have an opportunity to critique it if you like.
So the broad real headline is essentially to streamline government and make it more efficient.
Yeah.
How would a Reform administration with a Solent mayor and potentially in Hampshire County Council work with a prospective reform government in Westminster?
In terms of the government in Westminster, obviously, a long way to go. But I think what we would try to do is our key point would be to try and protect our local identity. And you may have seen one of the articles that I wrote for the New Reformer, which was about Hampshire's distinct history and identity. And I think sometimes in national government, that gets lost. So, that will inform a lot of what we do, because we're not just another cog in the machine of central government, and are just, our residents are just there to be taxed. So we would, obviously, any colleagues that we have in Parliament, we would work constructively with them. We're part of the same team, and we have to work with each other. But I think that we would also not be fearful, where necessary, of offering constructive criticism to say, right, you know what, based on what's happening on the ground here, maybe this policy needs to be rethought, or maybe this is not going to work for us here. I mean, there's been a number of examples of national policies, countless examples of national policies, which haven't really considered local nuance that much. And so that's why quite a number of them fail. And then you end up with a dispute between local government and central government, which ends up being a lose-lose for everyone. So really, we want to make sure as well that as much as possible that our candidates who end up becoming MPs are from this area, and understand the differences in this area and take that with them into Parliament. When we don't, we're quite keen in terms of the local membership to make sure that there is that kind of representation, albeit from people that are credible. So yeah, I think it would be obviously a constructive working relationship with our colleagues, but where we felt that it was necessary to give advice or offer constructive critique, we would do so.
The country has a lot of variety in terms of different cities and environments, as you've been saying. Hampshire is a very large county, and to sort of band it together might be quite challenging in terms of different needs and different requirements of where it is. What sort of views have you been hearing sort of on the doorstep and in meetings about these proposed devolution plans?
I think one of the main concerns actually is the banding together of areas which are quite different in character, like you've just mentioned. So if you take the New Forest, very rural, very historic, there's a concern, which I believe is a valid one, that the urban centre dominates the rural area, and that's something that we're keen to make sure that doesn't happen. I think another thing that's a concern that we're hearing as well is in terms of how the debt's going to be managed. So again, Hampshire County Council, Southampton, Eastleigh, their debts are well documented. Does this mean that effectively, if whatever ends up being the reconstitution of the different local government areas with this new mayor on top, does this mean that taxpayers in areas which were hitherto not as indebted, or maybe even running a surplus in some areas, are they going to pick up the tab for the failings of their neighbours, their neighbouring boroughs? That is a concern that has been expressed to us by quite a number of people. And also, now that I'm not just looking after Southampton, but also looking after Hampshire, that's a concern that when I've been going to some of the meetings with my colleagues that I've been hearing about. So I think they're the two main ones really that we're hearing about. And of course, the other thing is actually it's just a lack of, because they're quite opaque, these things. There's quite a lot of detail, and people are busy. They've got stuff to do in their lives, so they're not going to be sitting there agonizing through every single element of these proposals. And I think there's also a concern a little bit about the unknown. or the inability to really kind of understand what that means practically, what the implications of that for me, possibly for my business, and for example, planning. If I live in an area which is at the moment not majorly heavily developed, does this mean that a central mayor could quite easily do something which means that I'm going to have a whole new housing estate right next door to me, and I'm not going to be able to do much about it? There is a concern about that as well.
And in terms of the debt issue, would it be a case of cutting taxes, or was it more complicated than that?
I think I think the debt issue is more complicated, sadly, because, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain things which councils are obliged to provide and deliver. And I think, to your point about this relationship between central government and local government, my personal view is that central government's almost used local authorities, if you like, to outsource some of their difficult decisions. So it looks like it's a local authority issue, but actually it's partially a central government issue. If you take business rates, right, a lot of people see business rates increase and they're struggling with the cost of living. But actually, business rates are set by a separate independent agency, which is central government controlled, and local authorities collect business rates. But that's not widely understood, I don't think. The technical details of that are not widely understood, and they see the bill come in from the local authority that's collecting it, and they think it's the local authority, but actually it's not. It's an independent valuation agency, which is kind of overseen by central government. So I think for us, it's understanding the nuances between what you can and can't do. I think, obviously, we would like to reduce the burden on taxpayers, and where practically possible, given the debt that we've currently got, there's only two ways that that's going to go, right? The debt is going to be, it's either going to have to be a Section 114 notice issued by one of those authorities at some point, which is a de facto bankruptcy, which is not going to help anyone, or they're going to have to find the money. Our preference in finding the money would be to grow the economy, to try and create local incentives somehow so that the economy grows, and that through that growth, marginal taxes can be raised to help from the profits of that growth to help offset the debts, rather than put additional burden onto taxpayer.
And in terms of the nuance of the devolution issue, is Reform UK kind of isolated on this in Southampton, or is there any kind of common ground with the other parties?
Well, I've been looking at the media interviews and some of the reports, as have my colleagues, of what they've been saying, and I don't think there's much common ground with Labour, because they are, ultimately they are 100% lock, stock and barrel behind this, because it's ultimately a Labour government plan. I think also the Conservatives, if you look at the Hampshire-wide, the Conservatives are quite in favour of it as well. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because again, if you look at the detail upstairs, some of these ideas were initiated under the Conservative authority, a Conservative government, and Labour's kind of bringing them forward. So there's a continuum since Tony Blair came in of this kind of devolution project for going back 20, 25 years or so. So I think that those two parties, they're broadly in agreement about the principle of devolution, but they may disagree on some of the detail. But I think in terms of, they're perhaps not as sceptical as us in terms of, how the mayor is actually going to work with these new, this kind of new, almost like a cabinet, if you like, of people that are going to advise him. Because ultimately they support it, lock, stock and barrel. I think the Liberal Democrats, I'm aware that in Eastleigh they are opposed to the devolution project, but we think that's really because the Liberal Democrats have had quite a free run in Eastleigh for a long time. They've had this kind of domination, if you like, of the borough, and our belief is that's really a political opposition, not really an opposition in principle to, organisation full stop, although even though they might say that it is. So I think there might be some common ground with some of the more rural conservatives on some aspects of it, so like the urban and rural issue and the tensions between that, because obviously there's in the New Forest and stuff, there's still quite a number of Conservative councillors, and they're quite kind of worried about being, as they might, by Southampton dominating them or something. So there's some common ground there, but I think in terms of the bigger picture, I think we are quite distinct, because whilst we don't stand in the way of change, we're a reforming party. We're also cautious of change for change's sake. And is it yes, we agree that there's a problem. We might agree that the current settlement is not working, but is this the right solution? That is the question mark. And that's why in our paper we were almost asking for more information, because it was difficult for us to evaluate whether that it really is going to deliver the benefits that they say it is.